Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 26 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we're going to break down the NFC East. So we have some buys, sells, sleepers, and breakouts for all four teams in the division, as well as the division as a whole. We also have some divisional predictions coming for you at the end of the show. So before we dive in, if you've missed any of our previous shows, which include divisional breakdowns and previews for two of the NFC divisions, we still have the NFC West to come next week, but we've done the North and the South, and then all four divisions in the AFC. You can find those on any platform out there that carries podcasts. We're on pretty much everything, so Spotify, Apple, Amazon, YouTube, you name it, we're there. So go give us a follow on your platform of choice, so that way you don't miss any future episodes. And leave us a 5-star review, give us a like, and follow us on social media as well. We're on Twitter at Dynasty War Room, and you can subscribe on YouTube at the same handle as we look to grow that channel as well. So we appreciate all of you for tuning in, and let's just jump right into things here. So we've done enough of these division breakdowns now to, we all know how this is going to go. We'll start in alphabetical order with the Dallas Cowboys. So at quarterback, again, we're going to reference market values in this show, largely taken from Keep Trade Cut, which uses user inputs to, sort of rank players in terms of how the Dynasty community is currently feeling about players. So it's a good general, view on how the market is looking at different players. So starting with Dak Prescott, he comes in at QB 15 on Keep Trade Cut. He's right in between Brock Purdy and Tua, who just got paid. So I think it's the right range for Dak. He's almost 31 years old. There's some contract issues coming up, so we'll see if Dallas is able to figure that out with him or if he eventually hits the free agent market. But I think it's best for him and for fantasy that he stays in Dallas long term. So hopefully that gets done. It certainly is good for CeeDee Lamb. Now, Dak was great last year, and there's really no reason to think that he won't be great again. I have Dak maybe a spot or two above QB 15. I think QB 14 is about right for him. I think he's right in the same mix for me as Jaden Daniels and Brock Purdy. I do have him a solid gap ahead of Tua, and I think he's ahead of Jared Goff as well, who's kind of in this tier. So Dak Prescott, pretty safe quarterback play. They're going to throw the ball a lot, especially given the lack of depth in their backfield. So Dak Prescott, you should be in good hands if he is your QB1 or QB2 on a Superflex team in Dynasty. I don't think there's, if you're not one of those teams that has, a top 5 option in Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson or, Allen, Mahomes, you name it. I think Dak is a very good option in sort of that second tier of quarterbacks. So if he's your QB2, you're in very good hands because presumably that means you have one of those other sort of elite options. So good shape there. I expect the Dallas offense to be strong again and to lean on what worked last year, which was to air the ball out, get the ball to CeeDee Lamb as often as possible. And that was great for fantasy for both Lamb and for Dak. So we're going to touch on CeeDee Lamb and the rest of the receiver room in a minute, but let's take a look at running back. So Zeke Elliott is back in Dallas, where he spent most of his career, and he's coming in at RB 58, and he's joined by Rico Dowdle at RB 56, and then Deuce Vaughn at RB 77. So to me, Zeke Elliott is about the cheapest starting running back that you can buy right now, and he should get a ton of volume. I mean, we're talking about a guy on an offense that, we're expecting to be one of the top offenses in the league. A lot of touchdown opportunity. And last year in New England, even though, he started the year as the backup and didn't really get much of an opportunity until Ramondre Stevenson got injured, we saw that he's capable of still getting a lot of volume there at the end of the season. And sure, he's not the same runner that he used to be. I don't think anybody is going to try to tell you that he is. But he's still a very capable pass catcher. He's going to get volume. And even if this is some level of committee, which I'm not sure how much it actually will be a committee, but even if it is, and Rico Dowdle gets carries, because it's not like he's going to get shut out, Zeke is the guy that, to me, will get the goal line work. He's going to get the passing down work. He's the guy that I want to have from this team. And the fact that you can get him for almost nothing. I mean, you can get him, I'll bet, in some leagues for a 4th-round pick. I mean, he is going that cheap because people are that skeptical. They're worried that it's going to be Rico Dowdle or that Dallas is going to add another running back off of waivers or something, pick somebody up after roster cuts after the preseason. So it won't shock me if they do add a running back in some way, shape, or form at the end of August. But I don't necessarily expect it to be a big enough type of move that it's really going to affect whether Zeke Elliott is getting at least 50% of the work at running back. So at RB58 price, I think it's a great option to go in and scoop somebody up. Now, you shouldn't be counting on him necessarily as a weekly starter because we don't know that he is going to be capable enough of doing that. However, if you're talking a flex play, if you're in a league that has 3 or 4 flex spots, like most dynasty leagues, he fits into that role if need be. And if not, he's very solid running back depth if you need him as an RB3, RB4, RB5, whatever the situation. I think he's a great fill-in. So a player that kind of everybody thought was done, just being left for dead, now has some value again. So, he's somebody that to me is a hold. Unless you're a rebuilding team, obviously, then he's somebody that you should be looking to trade ASAP. And I would be looking to do that now before the season in case there is a situation where Dallas adds a running back. So, when you get a player of his age and sort of situation, you don't want to be messing around. If you're a rebuilding team, you should be moving on now as soon as you can. And you should be able to get something. I would try to ask for something more than a 4th-round pick. I think you could get a 3rd from a contender, and I think that'd be fine. So Zeke Elliott leading the backfield here, in Dallas. Leading the wide receiver room is CeeDee Lamb, who is being valued as the wide receiver 2 overall in Dynasty behind Justin Jefferson. He is there with Brandon Cooks at wide receiver 82, Jalen Tolbert, wide receiver 101. Ryan Flournoy is a rookie that's coming in. So it's a pretty lackluster wide receiver room outside of Lamb. So I'm a huge CeeDee Lamb fan. I think, he's somebody that to me is right there with Justin Jefferson as the wide receiver 1 overall in Dynasty. I think there is certainly a case to be made for either player. I just was faced with this decision at the 106 in the Dynasty War Room Listener League startup draft, and I did choose Justin Jefferson. However, if you are somebody that is in a shorter win now window, or in redraft or best ball, CeeDee Lamb to me is the wide receiver to have, because in addition to there's the age factor and everything that's great. That puts him right up there at the top. But he's got Dak Prescott for this year, locked and loaded, ready to go. And we assume that the contract situation should get worked out for Lamb. That's something to keep an eye on for Dynasty. If, playing in another format, you're not necessarily as concerned about his long-term contract situation. But if it continues to drag on to where we get a holdout type of situation, then there could be some concern with redraft. But for me, the decision came down with Jefferson versus Lamb was that CeeDee Lamb is a little bit more reliant on strong quarterback play, which he should get with Dak, and we think he will, but there is still the risk that something happens with the contracts. Dak or Lamb don't stay in Dallas. So there's a little bit of risk there, whereas Justin Jefferson, to me, is somebody that even when he gets poor quarterback play we saw at the end of last season, he's still extremely capable of putting up monster numbers, and he's gotten paid, he's got the contract, he's ready to go. I believe in JJ McCarthy, and even though it might take some time for him to both, settle in and, really see the field and establish himself, I'm trying to play the long game a little bit more with Lamb. So again, we're talking about such a minor difference between these players. I ran a poll from our Dynasty War Room Twitter account. And I think the final results were 51% or 59% favored Jefferson to 41% favoring Lamb. So I think that kind of goes to show you that there are plenty of people that believe CeeDee Lamb is the overall wide receiver one. I have CeeDee Lamb on a reigning championship team in another Dynasty league. So great to have. I do think that there's definitely a gap between Lamb, Jefferson, those two compared to Jamar Chase and Amon-Ra St. Brown, who I see as the 3 and the 4. So not really a whole lot else to say about CeeDee Lamb. Just awesome receiver. He's in line for a huge season, just like he did last year. I think it's fair to expect a tiny bit of regression just because when you have such an incredible season, it's hard to go up from that. But we're not talking any sort of fall back to earth that's anything huge. He should still be right there in the mix, top 3 wide receiver in redraft by the end of the year, assuming he avoids injury. So the rest of this wide receiver group, though, is a little bit more interesting because there's not a lot here. I mean, we're talking Brandon Cooks at wide receiver 82, who to me is really more of just somebody that you want to plug in on bye weeks and just have on your bench in case of injury. Certainly his value would go up should something happen to Lamb, but we saw last year that he's certainly capable of having big weeks, but he's extremely touchdown dependent. Whenever he did have a strong week, it was usually because he scored a touchdown. So not somebody that you're probably going to be starting or inserting into your, into your lineup unless it's a situation where you have a bunch of guys on buys or injury. So Jalen Tolbert is also there. He was kind of hyped up a bit as a prospect and hasn't done much so far in the NFL. However, this could finally be the year for him. He pretty much is alone as the wide receiver 3 on this team. So certainly somebody that's worth being put on your bench and given a chance. Now, if after a few games of the season, he's still not doing anything, I think you will have probably seen enough to move on. But certainly worth the stash now. Ryan Flournoy, the rookie, didn't really get any buzz during draft season, went undrafted in, almost every rookie draft. I think every rookie draft that I was in. But if you have a taxi squad, if you have an empty spot on your bench, he could be worth that spot just because the rest of the room is so weak. So in an offense that should be as strong as Dallas, it's always worth taking those shots. And now, before we get too deep into the show, a good tip for your roster management right now during this portion of the offseason, pay attention to when your players go on PUP or aren't active and whatnot, and you can slide them over from your active roster to an IR spot. And now is a good time to kind of churn through your roster a little bit and add some of those low-level guys that you think might have a chance to do something. I've done this in most of my leagues, especially, I've done it in every league, I think, where I've had somebody go on the PUP list. And you don't have to set a starting lineup until September. So you don't have to make sure that your roster is in line with everything that you need for September for a while yet. You have time. So yeah, if your starting lineup looks a little funny because you have a gap and somebody's not starting, whatever, it's fine. You don't have to worry about that for another month. And if you have the opportunity to stash somebody that is getting some hype in training camp, a Jalen Naylor, who I've done in a few situations, or Deneric Prince from Kansas City, somebody like that where probably wasn't rostered ahead of, this time now. But now that there's some buzz, getting fluffed up a little bit on Sleeper, check that trending list out, see who's there, see who you can throw onto your roster. And if it doesn't look like anything's going to work out, you can just cut them or somebody else on your roster, 4 weeks from now, and you're in the same situation you're in now. But if the player takes off, look, we saw this last year with Puka Nacua. Was drafted in the 4th round in a decent amount of rookie drafts, but he was certainly available on the waiver wire in a number of other leagues, including several of mine. And in one of those leagues, I was able to pick him up in July, and I held on, and obviously that worked out great. Tank Dell, another one that, even though he was drafted in a majority of leagues at some point in the 4th round of rookie drafts, there were some where he was a free agent. same sort of thing. He started getting some hype, throw him onto a roster, all of a sudden you have a starting wide receiver. So now is the time to kind of make those moves, churn through your roster a little bit, and take some flyers. Chances are things don't work out, but you'll never know if you don't try. So moving on over now to the tight end position, Jake Ferguson coming in at tight end 11, which I think is perfect for him. That's exactly where I have him. If you miss out on one of the top 7 in Dynasty, which I think are sort of all the obvious names in Laporta, McBride, Kincaid, Bowers, Andrews, Pitts, and Kelsey, Ferguson to me is a great option to have on your team. Now, TJ Hawkinson might normally be in that top group, but given his injury situation, I'm not really counting on him to do a whole lot in 2024 for at least the first half of the year. So for now, I'm not including him in that top 7 in Dynasty. I don't have him ranked as a top 7 tight end in Dynasty. So Jake Ferguson, though, at tight end 11, I think gives you some value. He's still got youth on his side. He's only 25 years old. He's being valued right in between Evan Engram and David Njoku, which is also where I have him. I have Engram a spot ahead, but I still, same sort of situation here. Still tight end 11. And there's not a lot of competition on this Cowboys offense in the receiving game outside of, CeeDee Lamb. So Ferguson has every opportunity here to be the number 2 in the passing game for Dak Prescott, 3rd at worst behind Brandon Cooks. So it's a good option to have. I think he's going to be a capable player that you can start on a weekly basis. And if you've missed out on one of those top guys, you should feel very good about having him as somebody to plug in. All right, so let's move on over to the New York Giants, who, struggled a lot last year. We saw, picking 6th overall in the draft, been the focus of the off-season Hard Knocks, which has been pretty good. Shows, some inside looks to the front office and some of their decision-making over the summer and the spring. And Daniel Jones back at quarterback for this team. And he comes in at QB 28 on Keep Trade Cut. Drew Lock is there to back him up. And I think one thing is pretty clear, and it's now or never for Jones. He's either going to hit his stride, show that he's a franchise quarterback, or he's going to struggle. He's going to get benched at some point during the year for Lock, and the Giants will be drafting a quarterback next season. So there's certainly a lot of risk involving Daniel Jones, which is why he's being priced so low. But I do think that people forget that he was actually a pretty nice fantasy quarterback to have in 2022 when he finished as the QB9 overall. Now, he's been an underwhelming passer, and his fantasy value largely comes from his rushing ability. In 2022, he had 700 yards on the ground and 7 touchdowns, but he has not topped 425 yards in any other season. So I think that kind of shows you that, he's a mediocre passer, and he really needs that ground game to support him from a fantasy situation. He needs to have the rushing yards. He needs to score on his own on the ground. And so because he's done it once, I do think he's worth a flyer given the cheap cost. You can get him for probably a 3rd-round pick. But just know that there is some extreme risk. Drew Lock could be starting by the end of the season. And I believe in his contract for Daniel Jones, there's something in there about an injury guarantee where if it becomes pretty clear to the team halfway through the season that he's not going to be the guy and he just hasn't gotten it done, there's a good chance that the Giants pull a Russell Wilson and bench Daniel Jones. Even if he's playing okay enough, if he's not playing well, they're just going to sit him so he doesn't get injured. That way they can get rid of him without taking on massive amounts of dead cap. So Drew Lock, somebody that should be on your roster, even though he's nothing all that special and it would be a poor situation to walk into, starting quarterbacks are still worth being rostered. So get ahead of everybody else when, instead of having to try to pick him up on waivers, just do it now when you can get him for free. And you're probably going to get a couple starts from Drew Lock at some point during this season. At running back, it's another, new running back situation in this division with Devin Singletary coming over. And he comes in at RB 42. Tyrone Tracy drafted on day 3, coming in at RB 60, and then Eric Gray, a draftee from last year, comes in at RB 80. So not the flashiest running back room. It's certainly a big downgrade from having Saquon Barkley, who moved on over to the rival Eagles. But Devin Singletary has worked in Brian Daboll's system before when they were in Buffalo together, and I don't think he's going to be any sort of flashy running back, but he should be solid, capable. He's not going to cost a lot to acquire. Another guy that I think you could get for a third-round pick, I think I even earlier in the offseason, I got him for a 4th-round pick in a league, which a bit of a steal, but somebody that if you're a contender and you need an RB3, RB4, I mean, in a desperate situation, I could see him being your RB2 as well. He's going to start and be capable. But I think as your RB3 is a good spot to be, and I think for a 3rd-round pick, that's a great price. I do like Tyrone Tracy as the backup over Gray. I added Tracy pretty much everywhere I could in the 4th round of rookie drafts during the spring because he has some pass catching upside. And should things not work out with Singletary, because he's certainly not a slam dunk, that should give you a little bit of excitement as well, being a rookie, although he is an older rookie. I think he's 24 already. So. And then Eric Gray should be rostered. I don't think he should be left on waivers, given some of the ambiguity. Excuse me. We don't do edits on this podcast. We're leaving everything in here. But I just don't think that Eric Gray is going to really do much to warrant taking over that backup job. However, you never know. And so given this time of the year, he's probably on waivers in some of your leagues. Throw him on your team. If you're a clear top 3 running back on a team that, doesn't have a locked and loaded bell cow back, all 3 guys should probably be rostered. So that's an example here of, having a guy thrown on your bench just to take up some space on the off chance that he becomes worth something. You never know. Now, one guy that we should know will be elite is Malik Nabers, who comes in at wide receiver 9. Wan'Dale Robinson checks in at wide receiver 79. Darius Slayton is still on this team. Jalen Hyatt at wide receiver 78. And then Isaiah Hodgins is still around as well. Now, Malik Nabers at wide receiver 9 seems a little high when you first see that or hear it in your case. But it's actually pretty spot on to me because he's ranked behind A.J. Brown, but he's above Tyreek Hill and Drake London. And I think that makes a lot of sense. He's not going to have the year 1 production to match an A.J. Brown or Tyreek Hill, obviously, but he should still be very good. He's so young, not even 21 yet. And I think he'd be the wide receiver 1 in just about any rookie class that I can think of in the last, however many years. So we're talking a really good prospect. He's the clear number 1 on this team. And even if the QB play, is a little bit rough, it might take Nabers a few games to kind of get into the swing of things. It's not a perfect situation, but rookies usually get stronger as the season goes on. Their value really increases in the back half of the fantasy season, which, if you're a contender is obviously good news if you have Nabers on your roster. And there's always the upside that if Daniel Jones figures things out, Nabers could have a really special rookie season. Daniel Jones has never really had a weapon that's even remotely close to as talented as Malik Nabers. So that's good for the prospects of Jones figuring things out. And he's going to get a lot of volume, a lot of targets. Should be in line for a good rookie season regardless of how poor the QB play is. Just there will be some flexibility there in terms of, just how good of a season can he have. And that will depend on Daniel Jones. So for now, the other receivers on this team, Wan'Dale Robinson, I think he has some bye week appeal, some flex possibility. He's shown some flashes, but has never really been somebody that's capable of these huge weeks. Jalen Hyatt, more of a downfield threat, speed guy, good player in college, and had some hype coming into the draft. But I do worry that he's going to fall a little bit behind. And by the time he potentially has the quarterback play that's strong enough to support him, it might be kind of too late for his fantasy value to recover. Darius Slayton, I actually think could have some bye week appeal because he's going to be a starting wide receiver on this team in 2 wide receiver sets, most likely. So something to keep in mind there, because Wan'Dale Robinson is more of a slot guy. I think it's really Slayton versus Hyatt on the outside, and I would give the edge to the veteran to start the season. We'll see how things shake out throughout the season, but again, unless the quarterback play is better, I don't think there's enough here to support more than one receiver being truly fantasy relevant. Especially when Daniel Bellinger and Theo Johnson are here at tight end, and I think that at least one of them probably has a better season than, a Jalen Hyatt. So tight end, I think that Bellinger coming in at tight end 31 compared to Johnson at tight end 27 I think Bellinger represents a better value there actually, because somebody has to see the field at tight end. I do think it's going to be Bellinger to start the year. In fact, I think I saw that Theo Johnson was just put on the PUP. So again, as we talked about, if you have Theo Johnson on your roster, move him to IR, go pick somebody up. And we saw some flashes from Bellinger as a rookie before he kind of took a backseat last year to Darren Waller. But I would take the shot on him because I think he's simply in a better position to start and have an impact right now. Theo Johnson could end up being a good player in the long run, but we didn't see a ton from him as a prospect. He's really more of a projection-based guy because of his athleticism and how good of an athlete he is. So Bellinger is the guy that I would prefer, especially since his price is lower than Theo Johnson's. I think he's probably a year or two away from contributing, whereas at least with Bellinger, you might be able to get some solid, depth, value from him this year. I think he's a good player to have as a tight end 3 on a contending dynasty team, and is a really cheap buy right now that you might not even need to spend a draft pick on, but for a 4th round pick could be something interesting as well. All right, so moving on over to the Philadelphia Eagles, who had a pretty up and down season last year. Started off red hot before collapsing down the stretch. Jalen Hurts comes in at QB5 to lead this team. He's backed up by Kenny Pickett. And I think that QB5 for Hurts, having him behind both CJ Stroud and Lamar Jackson, is a little bit crazy, especially having him behind Lamar Jackson, who is a year and a half older than Jalen Hurts. I certainly understand the argument with CJ Stroud, given his age. He is several years younger than Hurts. But I would still have Hurts probably in that QB3 spot, especially if you're a contending team. Stroud I would take in a rebuild over Hurts, but I wouldn't take Lamar Jackson over either one. And the main reason for that, beside the age factor, is longevity. So in terms of a rebuilding team, running quarterbacks have a harder time holding up over longer periods of time compared to pocket passers. We really haven't seen running quarterbacks make it into their 30s being effective elite quarterbacks. When, your legs are such an important part of your arsenal, it does slow down eventually, and it'll do so a little bit sooner than, those pocket passing quarterbacks that can play till they're 38, 39, 40 years old. So in that sense, you might be able to get, 15 years out of CJ Stroud, whereas Jalen Hurts, you maybe have, 4 to 5 seasons of, high level quarterback play. So from that sense, being a rebuilding team certainly makes sense that you would prefer somebody like Stroud. But if you're a contender, having a running quarterback is huge. I mean, we're talking about a guy that is probably going to be top 5 in fantasy points per game, each of the next few seasons with Jalen Hurts. He was clearly in the top 2 alone with Josh Allen last year. And so with Jalen Hurts and his ability to run, he does have strong weapons, stronger than Lamar, and probably stronger than CJ Stroud, although there's a little bit more of a debate there. But A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith and Saquon Barkley is a pretty good trio, not to mention Dallas Goedert. So if you're looking for somebody over the next, 4 to 5 years that is going to give you top 5 points per game production, I think Hurts is your guy if you're in this situation of choosing between a Hurts, Stroud, and Jackson. But if you think you might be rebuilding or you're looking for a longer term guy of 10 plus years of top 10 production, but maybe never top 3 in points per game, then Stroud might be your guy. So it really just depends on what kind of archetype you're looking for your dynasty roster. And there are different ways that you can go with that. But because Hurts and Lamar are very similar types of quarterbacks, I'll take the guy that's a year and a half younger, that has been a little bit more consistent over the years in terms of high-level fantasy play. Lamar is certainly going to give you huge weeks, but Hurts can do that too, and he's been generally more consistent. So that's why I think QB5 is a little bit low for Jalen Hurts right now. Now, another guy that I am very high on is Saquon Barkley, who comes over from the Giants. He's RB8 on Keep Trade Cut. He's got Kenneth Gainwell and Will Shipley there to back him up. Shipley, a rookie. And Saquon is being ranked from a market value standpoint between Travis Etienne and Kyren Williams, which I think is both fair and shows to me that there's a pretty big tier break after Saquon Barkley, because I am a little bit skeptical of Kyren Williams for this year. Blake Corum coming in, just some of the, I don't know, I'm just not a true Kyren Williams believer, but I don't know that there are that many people that would call themselves like true Kyren truthers. So Saquon, to me, should be in line for a very good year. It's very difficult to project running backs for more than like a year or two at a time. And so when you get a running back that is in their age 27 season, I think that's when you begin to kind of think about moving on from them before they hit a wall. But given the running back landscape and just how thin it truly is, especially once you get past this, top 8, I'm perfectly fine with keeping Saquon and riding him out as long as possible. He moves over to a better offense, better offensive line, better weapons around him. He's not going to be the only person that the defending team has to game plan for. And while there may be a little bit more goal line competition with Jalen Hurts being able to steal some touchdowns, I don't think that they're really going to hurt each other that much. I think Hurts is still going to get some of his. Certainly if there are situations at the 1, they're going to do the tush push. He'll get in that way. But I don't think we will see Jalen Hurts needing to do the tush push as often or needing to scramble around himself in quite the same level as he did last year and in prior seasons, because Saquon is going to actually get in the end zone. We've had multiple shows where we've talked about DeAndre Swift and how he just seemed to always magically fall down at the 1-yard line last year. I don't think that Saquon is going to be in that same type of situation. I think he'll actually get in the end zone. He's a better running back than DeAndre Swift. And even if the offensive line takes a little bit of a step back without Kelsey at center, it's still a very good offensive line. I'm expecting at worst that he can replicate his numbers from last season, where he had 10 touchdowns, but I expect his numbers to be better. I'm expecting him to get back above 1,000 yards, get to about 50 receptions. And if he can at least get to or surpass that 10 touchdown mark, I'm bullish on his chances of doing that. We should be talking about a top 5, top 8 running back and somebody that would be very strong for fantasy this year. So Gainwell and Shipley, worthwhile holding on to, stashing given Saquon's injury history, but this is not going to be a committee. This is a bell cow situation, and Saquon is one of those supremely talented running backs in the league, and I'd be happy to have him on any of my dynasty teams. At wide receiver, the Eagles have A.J. Brown, who checks in at wide receiver 8, Devonta Smith at wide receiver 17, and then a whole bunch of question marks about who's going to be that third receiver, especially in the slot. Paris Campbell, Anaya Smith, Johnny Wilson. Smith and Wilson both drafted by the Eagles this year on day 3. So we'll start with A.J. Brown, who should be in line for another monster season. I think he's priced correctly between Garrett Wilson and Malik Neighbors, which makes a lot of sense. But if you're a contender, and I would rather have A.J. Brown this year than Garrett Wilson. So if you're a contender and you can make a deal to acquire Brown or you can get Brown plus for Garrett Wilson. I think that's a good deal to make if you're a contending team, because Garrett Wilson still, even though we've seen he's very talented, there is a lot of projection still with him being able to actually become a top 10 receiver. Aaron Rodgers is somebody that I don't believe in anymore. So if you can get, 2 to 3 years of top 10 wide receiver production from a guy like A.J. Brown for the promise of that projection, that production from Wilson, I would do it, especially if you can get, a second round pick on top, or, a depth running back, something that will help your team this year. I'd probably be looking to do that deal. It'd be tough. It's a tough situation to try to give up a guy like Garrett Wilson and whatnot. But I think when we go down the list of dynasty rankings in terms of their market value, there's that clear top 4 of truly elite guys that we talk about all the time, right? And then there's Puka Nacua and Marvin Harrison and Garrett Wilson. And to me, Marvin Harrison is just on a whole nother level as a prospect, so I totally understand having him at 5 or 6, depending on your situation. Puka, we saw last year, has done it, and he has youth on his side. But Wilson and Brown, I think, are a very interesting, just different types of players. And so that's where you got to ask yourself whether your team is competing now or competing later. And if you're competing now and you don't think, or you're a little bit hesitant or skeptical on Garrett Wilson being an elite player this year, go explore this type of move. Because I don't know that there are many other players out there that would be in this type of situation where, you're going to get elite production for a cheaper cost compared to your younger, higher priced Garrett Wilson. So something to explore. Now, Devonta Smith is also somebody that I like a lot. Very solid, just all around good weapon to have. Wide receiver 17, I think that's a very good price. He's between Nico Collins and DK Metcalf on Keep Trade Cut. I still have him behind Nico Collins, but I actually have him and Collins above Brandon Ayuk and Rome Odunze, who are ranked right now as wide receivers 14 and 15. So a little bit of wiggle room there. And so I like Smith a lot. I think that's a great price to go and acquire him. But in terms of the third wide receiver on this team, I'm not sure that whoever emerges will actually have a lot of fantasy value. But Anais Smith, slot receiver, Johnny Wilson, who's probably more of a big slot guy, just big, huge size. I think he's 6'6", potentially has some tight end in him down the line. But somebody might emerge. If it's Paris Campbell, that would kind of be a bummer for fantasy purposes. But, we're talking somebody that's going to be the, fifth target in the offense behind the two receivers, behind Barkley, behind Goddard. So certainly stash Smith and Wilson on your benches in a dynasty league, but don't count on really getting much out of them for a while. Dallas Goedert, though, at tight end, he's being a little bit overlooked. Coming in at tight end 19, he's somebody that, at 29 years old, I'd probably have more at tight end 17, but it's hard to be excited about him. I think he's a high-quality tight end 2 for your dynasty team. Again, we're talking probably fourth in the pecking order of the offense behind Saquon in the passing game. So, and he's had some injury issues as well. So this isn't somebody that's a perfect player anymore. He had a lot of hype, several years ago, but age 29, we're just kind of getting to the point where he's an okay option, throw out there when you need to, but isn't somebody that I'm building my tight end room around in a dynasty league. All right, so let's move on over now to our final team in the division, the Washington Commanders, who have a lot of new faces. So new coaching staff, new quarterback. Jaden Daniels checks in at QB 12 after being selected in the first round of the NFL draft. And Marcus Mariota is his backup. So a lot of high-profile backup quarterback names in this division, including who I forgot to mention in the Dallas section, Trey Lance, still there in Dallas. So lots of big name backups, and QB 12 is a little bit high for me in this division. or in these market value rankings, but I understand it. He's squarely in line to me with Dak Prescott, Brock Purdy, who I think I have as 13 and 14. So we're kind of right in that same tier. So I think it depends on your team situation, again, as it usually does, whether you're a rebuilding team or a contender, about whether you should be, preferring somebody like Dak versus Daniels. So the thing with Jaden Daniels that really does worry me a bit is that his prospect profile definitely had some question marks. I was pretty down on him initially as a prospect when we started looking at rookies during the winter. He was a one-year wonder, had a late breakout, took a long time to really turn into something in college before exploding. All that being said, his ceiling is sky high. I mean, we're talking about somebody that could truly break fantasy football because he's shown that he can be a talented passer and an elite running quarterback. So we all know what that does in fantasy. He's got that, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Anthony Richardson type of upside that all those players possess. So all that factored in, and his age, that obviously explains why why he was a top 5 pick in rookie drafts, why he is, somebody that people are excited about. So he's certainly an appealing fantasy asset for those reasons, because we do like to, shoot for that upside. Just know that there is some significant risk, and, build your team in a way that you can, withstand that if things don't go well. Pairing him with, more of a veteran, stable passing quarterback, like a Jared Goff, a Tua, something like that, might make a lot of sense. I wouldn't necessarily be pairing him with another risky quarterback play, like on one of those other rookies or, somebody of that type of regard, a Drake May, JJ McCarthy, whatever the situation. So Jaden Daniels, QB12 on Keep Trade Cut. Now at running back, we have some more new faces. Austin Eckler comes over from LA, and he was really brought over to fill the Antonio Gibson role. So Brian Robinson coming in at RB28, Eckler RB47, and then Chris Rodriguez is still there as well. And Robinson should be the starter and handle all the early down work and the goal line work, with Austin Eckler handling the passing down duties. But this has a potential to be one of the more frustrating backfields in fantasy, especially when you pair all this with Jaden Daniels' ability to run. So I don't mind Robinson. He's really kind of the one running back here that I'd be looking to roster, as a QB3, QB4, or running back 3 or running back 4 on your team. But I am avoiding Austin Eckler, even though he's been, great over the years for fantasy. I just think, the time is up. He really did not look good last year with the Chargers, especially down the stretch. So I worry about this offense as a whole, and that, I just don't see Eckler having a whole lot of value left. And, he's on a short contract. So his time is up in my mind for fantasy, Dynasty in particular. But he could have some flex appeal at certain points during the season, given his pass catching ability, but it's just not something that I'm chasing. I would much rather use that roster spot on somebody younger, somebody with just a little bit more upside there. And so that means that Robinson's the only one that I'm looking to roster out of this group. At wide receiver, some familiar faces that have been there for a while. Terry McLaurin at wide receiver 39, Jahan Dotson at wide receiver 57, and then the new face, Luke McCaffrey at wide receiver 77, along with, familiar name, Diami Brown, who's been there a while. And then outside of that, we're talking Dax Milne. We're talking guys that are not going to have an impact on fantasy. So when you're really looking at this team, I think there's only 3 names to pay attention to. That's McLaurin, Dotson, and McCaffrey from a wide receiver look, or, looking at the wide receivers. Terry McLaurin, almost 29 years old. He's being valued in between Amari Cooper and Stephon Diggs, which seems about right. Christian Watson is a wide receiver 38. And so to me, there's a pretty big teardrop after Watson at 38 and McLaurin maybe is the leader of the next tier. I think I'd probably take him over Cooper and Diggs, but I can understand, the grouping there. So I think a lot of that really just comes down to whether or not Jaden Daniels is good in the NFL. If he's throwing the ball around, that should be very nice for McLaurin. McLaurin is somebody that I'm probably looking at as a wide receiver 4 in Dynasty. I'm probably not looking at him to be a top 3 guy on a contending team. Whereas Jahan Dotson had a very rough 2023. But with the new staff, the new QB, he gets another chance here to kind of prove himself, establish himself, and be a quality option for Jaden Daniels. But I am a little bit skeptical. It's just very difficult to see, the path. He's got upside, so I'd be happy to have Dotson on my bench. And, if you can acquire him for something cheap or kind of as a throw-in to a larger trade, I think that can make some sense. Take the gamble. But ultimately, it's, kind of a tough situation there. I have a hard time seeing him being more than maybe a bye-week fill-in type, which is kind of a bummer to, considering he was a first-round pick. And so to me, those dreams of him being an every-week starter are probably gone. Now, if you're looking to chase upside, Luke McCaffrey to me actually is somebody that, if you consider how Dotson struggled, McLaurin, age 29, and the lack of depth on this team, Luke McCaffrey is coming into a situation where, he's entering the league with his new quarterback, and there's some upside and potential there for him to find a role. So he'll see the field as a rookie. It might take him some time to kind of establish himself, but he's kind of forgotten in rookie drafts. I mean, I saw him fall to the late 4th round in rookie drafts all the time. So I don't think people are that high on him. He certainly wasn't somebody that I was that interested in as a prospect, but he goes to a pretty good situation. And so for those reasons, I think it's safe to take a gamble on him and see what you can get, because the upside is so high and you're not really giving up that much. And if he doesn't work out, it is what it is. You've lost a 4th round pick, which most of the time doesn't work out anyways. Now, a rookie that I also am very high on, or I shouldn't say also high on, but am high on, much higher on than Luke McCaffrey, and that's Ben Sinnott at tight end. Tight end 16. He still is in the room with Zach Ertz, who might start the season as the starter. So that's something to keep in mind with Ben Sinnott, especially maybe from a redraft situation. You probably shouldn't be counting on Ben Sinnott as a starter. But for Dynasty, I really like Ben Sinnott. I think that I would have him at tight end 14, right behind Pat Freiermuth. So it might take a year, but if he can grow with Daniels, there's a clear opportunity for him to become the second option in the passing game, which to me represents a lot of upside. And we've seen rookies have success earlier and earlier. We saw that a lot last year, and I still don't think that we can bet on that, but it could come sooner than maybe we traditionally saw. And Ben Sinnott to me represents a very exciting, rookie tight end. All right, so that covers all 4 teams in the NFC East. And so now it's time, as we always do, for our biggest buy, our biggest sell, our biggest sleeper, and our big breakout candidate for the division, along with our division standings predictions. So for the biggest buy, I'm going to go with Devin Singletary, running back 42 from the New York Giants. And to get somebody that has sort of consistently been a solid back-end RB2 for fantasy at RB42 price, I think that's a really good move to make. If you're a contender and you can get him for a 3rd-round pick or some sort of smaller deal, I'm not saying send the house for Devin Singletary, but to get you a running back 3, to get you some added depth, a flex play. I mean, he was pretty good with Houston last year. He was usable in Buffalo as well before that. So in this offense where, Malik Neighbors is going to be there to hopefully take some pressure off of the running backs. This isn't going to be a, stack the box type of situation against Singletary because they're going to have to worry about Neighbors. They're going to have to worry about Daniel Jones running the ball to the outside. So Devin Singletary, biggest buy for me at this market price because like Zeke Elliott, who we mentioned, it's difficult to get starting running backs in Dynasty for cheap, and Singletary falls into that category, and I think that he'll be a more than capable runner for your team this year. Now, my biggest sell at their current market value is going to be Austin Eckler, who comes in at RB47. So hardly any difference between Singletary and Eckler, and to me, the situations are drastically different. I mean, if you can trade Singletary or receive Singletary for Eckler straight up, or Eckler and a fourth for Singletary, I think I would make that move all day long. Austin Eckler is toast for fantasy purposes, and to me, if you can still get something of value for him, if you can get a third round pick, get a rookie, a recently drafted rookie. I mean, just look at some of the players that went early third round. Would you tell me you'd rather have Austin Eckler or Marshawn Lloyd, or Austin Eckler or Jalen Wright, or Ben Sinnott, or Roman Wilson, Troy Franklin? I mean, all of these names are players that I would much rather have than Austin Eckler. So even a Bucky Irving, Kamani Vidal, I mean, there are a bunch of rookies that just went in the third round of drafts that I would much rather have than Austin Eckler. So if you can make that move, I would absolutely do it. I just don't see how he provides anything to your team, especially if you're trying to win this fall. Now, for my biggest sleeper, this was probably the toughest spot in the division because I don't think there's anyone super obvious, but I got down to two names. Jalen Tolbert for Dallas, and then Luke McCaffrey, who's who I'm going to go with. So McCaffrey, as we just talked about, wide receiver 77. He was drafted in the fourth round of rookie drafts. And for that price, he's definitely got some upside. We talked about the struggles of the rest of that receiver room between Dotson and then McLaurin getting up there in age. And everything kind of is there for McCaffrey to make himself valuable to this team and translate that into fantasy success. So now I don't think he's going to turn into the next best thing or anything like that. I think Tolbert actually maybe has a little bit higher ceiling because of the offense he's in if he ends up at some point being the number 2 with a Brandon Cooks injury. But McCaffrey, I think, to me, does have some upside here. Tyrone Tracy could be a good choice as well if you're not a Devin Singletary believer, or do what I have done in a lot of leagues and get both. But Luke McCaffrey is who I'm going to go with at this pick. And then last but not least, my breakout candidate for the division. Not a ton of exciting options, but somebody that I think could be useful and have some upside is Daniel Bellinger, tight end 31 for the Giants. I think that Bellinger is going to start ahead of Theo Johnson. I think that there's going to have to be balls that go to him because, Daniel Jones in his prove-it year, he's going to be airing it out. There's no Saquon. So I think that between Neighbors and then Singletary, I think Bellinger has a case to be the third option in this offense, and that will be worth something in fantasy football. All right, so last but not least, we'll go through our division standings, and I think that Dallas is the best team in this division. I think they're going to win the division, be number 1. I think they'll make the playoffs, obviously, as one of those top 4 divisional leaders. And Philly should make a wild card. I think they'll come in second in the division. Washington third and New York fourth. I think both Washington and New York missed the playoffs. But Dallas, Philly, I think that's pretty consensus. I don't think that's anything crazy to have those two teams be playoff teams with Dallas as the division leader. So there you have it. There is our NFC East preview. Last week, we will have our final division preview with the NFC West, and then we will dive into a lot more just different types of shows as we gear up for the season itself. We'll talk about my guys and MVPs and some whole different episodes. We're actually going to go over a little bit, some highlights from our startup draft for the Listener League, which has been ongoing. We've got a slow draft going as we speak. So shout out to all those guys who have made it a very interesting draft so far. We got a lot of good stuff to talk about. So we'll do a Dynasty Decisions episode where we talk about some of the key decisions that people had to make on the clock and how those decisions might shape up throughout the season. So there you have it. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you all. This is the Dynasty War Room podcast, and we will talk to you all next week.